so when we talk about this part, I get teary-eyed, like I said, because God chose this profession, and I'm
Mhm.
thankful for all the degrees I've had and the positions I've had. But my brand is Shinita. People know me as Shinita Houston, Shinita Jones, Shinita Simpson. But at the end of the day, I am
You'll
Shinita
forever be
through and
Shanita
through.
Houston.
You know, and people always say, thank you for being who you say you are, right? And that's being true and
Mm-hmm.
authentic. But to give you some background, I could say I have 4 degrees: a Bachelor
Mm-hmm.
of Science, a Master's of Art in Teaching, a Master of Art in Rehabilitation Counseling, and an EDS, right, in administration. And I'm certified in K-12, cross-cast special education. I have
Mm-hmm.
an education principal cert, elementary and secondary, that's expired because I've never used principal. And then I have SPED admin, K-12 special education admin,
Mm-hmm.
which is
Mm-hmm.
lifetime. I was a special education administrator, but through that work, collaborated, consulted, led, and guided teachers, assistant soups, and superintendents throughout that
Mm-hmm.
work for a very long time. And I have been blessed, and I have a different lens than many, many people, and I have been truly blessed because I have taught every grade, pre-K through adult learners. How many
Mm.
educators can say that at my age?
I
Pre-K.
cannot say
And most
that.
people is like, how is that possible? Because I started off, God chose this career because my uncle, when I was getting my master's in rehabilitation counseling, he worked at Bishop Healy Catholic School. And he said, Shanita, our second grade class is overcrowded and we need another teacher. And I think you'll be great. Come and volunteer for a couple of weeks or a month.
Mm-hmm.
And then, the priest will see how great you are. We'll see how great you are. He said, you just have a
Mm-hmm.
natural talent, right? And I went and I volunteered, but that was the teacher, that was the teams, the principal, the principal, the teachers, the team's idea. But father didn't have the funds for it. So I said, I gotta get out
Mm-hmm.
of here. But he knew he had to answer because I went into this. I enjoyed my time, but I need to make money, right? I have a
Mm-hmm.
child. I'm in school, grad school.
Mm-hmm.
So a principal at St. Engelbert Focus School made a position for me. Miss
Mm.
Sybil Self, God bless her soul. She made me
Mm.
we didn't call it paraprofessional back then, but it's paraprofessional, the in-school substitute and teacher assistant. And once the teachers in the building, I developed relationships with the children. I'm a relationships person. I come from a big family, and they recognized my skill set. And I was really higher degreed. I was working on my master's than many of the teachers. They felt
Mm-hmm.
comfortable taking off work because I could implement the curriculum. I had good classroom management, and that was a K-8 school. So over the course
Mm.
of those 2 years, I taught every grade. Then in the summer,
Got
they
it.
had a preschool across, on the side, right across the parking lot. And I went over to the preschool during the summertime and taught in the preschool. And I had a friend, Erica. I always help people hustle, make money. I got her hired over in the summer at the preschool. She started working at Gateway High School. Her high school trigonometry teachers, Miss Irons, she brought Erica in as a long term sub because it was a teacher shortage back then in 2002. Erica said, Shanita, you can come work at Gateway and make $132.50 a day. Hot dang, that's some money, right? While you finish with your master's, because I was going into counseling, rehabilitation
Mm-hmm.
counseling, that's working with individuals with substance abuse, developmental disabilities,
Mm-hmm.
mental health. That was my field, right? At the time. And so I wound up working at Gateway in special education. Like I said, God
Mm-hmm.
chose that for me because I was working with adults with mental illness, developmental disabilities. They needed some teachers. So I became an in school sub. And through teacher evaluations, one of the principals came in one day. He said, Shanita, I need you to meet with me in my office. He said, you have a skill. I see a gift in you. We're going to put you on a provisional. He said, by that time, I
Mm.
had a master's. This was my first year in. And he showed me that teaching schedule. So I went from that sub pay to master's pay. I'm like, oh yeah, I can work this out, right? Motivated by money, but
Yeah.
still
Yeah.
having live seeing the difference that I was making with my students. And then I had to go
Mm-hmm.
back to school to get my teaching certification. So they're like,
that's
by next
when we
year,
ended up going to school together.
yeah, at Webster. And then it's like, okay, you're in Masters now, then you'll be at Masters plus 15, Masters plus 30. And it's like, okay, you're at the top of the teaching scale, because back then, I don't even think they had like a PhD, EDD, because it wasn't the norm for teachers, right? It was just Masters plus 30. And once you got beyond that, you got to pay. So I taught at Gateway for 4 years, and I really loved it. And my oldest students are 38, going on 39 years old, making a difference in lives, And secondary just was always my jam. That's a long career. I chose secondary because I just like working with older students, like you said, because of their agency. They had a voice. And, I had them 9th through 12th grade. And I knew that it was very important, like you said, to fill those gaps, to help them and support them and provide them for wraparound. Your life comes back full circle. I was watching the news this morning and they had a special on a Covenant House. And I was like, wow, it tugged at my heart. I was like, I seen so many students that were in need and unhoused or having problems at home that wanted to change their environment to the Covenant House as a way out of being abused or being in a toxic home, because they wanted something different from themselves. Just as a teacher, instilling that in them and giving them a sense of pride and exposing them through books and conversations. And it was just life-changing, And then I went on to St. Louis County and special school district, taught in Ferguson, Florissant, and across the entire county, because I was a homebound teacher working with students that the population. I've also worked in alternative education, right? Because a lot of my students didn't do well in their neighborhood schools for many different reasons. They were brilliant, they were smart, but they didn't do well with, like you said, indoctrination, right? They didn't do well. They didn't all have problem solving skills. They needed that smaller setting. So when my students got suspended long term, a lot of them didn't even make it in alternative education because of the same. They just didn't do well with rules, but one-on-one, they were phenomenal. Myself and a couple of my other colleagues, we taught students in Burger King, at the library, at the coffee house. We taught them, and they would come rain, sleet, or snow, even when we were shut down. I've even taught in St. Louis County Justice Center. I used to get locked up, and I would not suggest that to anybody, but God's covering was over me. I got locked up with my students, right? The correctional officers used to be petrified when I came. They're like, you're so young, and Shinita, you're working with these men that can overpower you. You're locked in. You can only get out if mass control let you out. Please, we know you're good at it. We see the light that you're shedding. We see the difference. Even the inmates act different with you, because I work there in my other capacity as a counselor. And then they do with us, because you respect them and they respect you and they want to change, And then I went on and went into administration, went back to St. Louis Public Schools as a special education coordinator, and then back to St. Louis County and Special School District as a coordinator. Then I retired in June of 2025 as a director. And I still work in education as a consultant. And I sit on a school board for the Leadership School, the first charter school in St. Louis County. And that is the highest level of leadership in education for free. Imagine that, right? That's the greatest servitude that you could ever have, being on a school board and that governance piece and ensuring all things are in place for students. So everything has come full circle, not because of the path that Shinita said she wanted to write out and plan for herself, because I follow, when God spoke, I listened. And I just organically moved in that path. So that's why I'm so passionate about helping families, helping students. And also the blessings that my Nalini and Demaya have are because of the love and the passion that I put into the thousands of students of lives that I have impacted over the past 26 years. And I've held everybody accountable. I have been the one to push back to say, hey, this is not all right. This is not okay. I'll tell my colleagues, everyone here is everyone gets a check. So that's why we have to empower educators and not enable them.